In this video, we'll continue our series to test and rank all perks in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, with this episode focusing on the strength perks. Get ready for some disappointment though. Some of these perks are garbage. I've included a link to the full perks database I created where you can plan your own build if you're interested. Timestamps are in the description, and let's get to testing. Up first is the level 6 perk, Hardworking Lad. This perk reduces the weight you take on when you carry a body or sack around, removes the stamina loss from carrying them, and increases our carry capacity by 8. From the testing, we can see that carrying a human body adds 41 pounds of weight without the perk, and stamina does indeed drain. Close to half of the bar is gone from walking the inside of this pen. Once we take the perk, our carry capacity does go up by 8, and the weight of a body only goes up by 21 instead of 41, which is roughly half. We also don't lose a single point of stamina from walking the same loop in the pen, so the perk is working flawlessly. I also tested to see if bodies weigh differently if they had more or less gear on them, but they weighed the same. I also tested if different people weighed differently, but it seems to be broken into only two groups, men and women. Men weigh 41 pounds and women weigh 31 pounds, which reduces to 21 and 16 respectively with the perk. Any perk that increases carry capacity is worth taking in my view. The other two things are bonuses on top. Now let's talk about Train Hard, Fight Easy. This perk reduces the strength requirement for equipping any weapon by 2. We can see this battle longsword requires 16 strength to use, but our Henry has only 14 strength and shows as a red stat. After taking the perk, we see the requirement go down to 14 and no longer red, meaning we won't have a debuff for using it. The strength stat is what determines how much damage each swing does, so a higher strength will do more damage with the same weapon compared to a lower strength. This is best illustrated by showing the damage numbers for two weapons, the battle longsword we looked at earlier and a saber with even higher stat requirements. Now let's add on the perk which lowers the strength requirements by 2, and we see the damage numbers increase dramatically, by 8, 10, and 3 for the battle longsword, or roughly 12.5% more. For the saber, we still see amazing damage increase numbers even though we don't yet have the required strength to use it, by 9, 9, and 3 respectively, or around an 11% increase in damage. I decided to test this further by taking perks that add +1 to strength and another perk that adds a further 2 or 3 in total more and their respective damage numbers. The numbers still go up for both, increasing by about 7% for the first strength gain and only 5% for the next 2 strength, or 2.5 per strength. There might be diminishing returns the higher your strength numbers go, but it's safe to say it helps a lot. I decided to run one last test, which we'll go over very quickly. I picked 2 weapons that we already qualify to use based on the strength requirements and added the perk as well as the +1 and +3 strength to compare. While the damage numbers do go up, they only increase by 1 damage per strength at all levels, meaning this perk will increase your damage for weapons you have enough strength to use, but the increase is almost negligible. Based on the math, this perk helps tremendously in the early game, but can still help you in the late game even when you've maxed out your character because it creates a bigger gap between the weapon's strength requirements and your character's stats. This is a great perk for sure. Finally, an easy one. Level 8 Pack Mule increases our carry capacity by 12 with the perk. After testing before and after, I can confirm it does add +12 to our total carry capacity. I'm a huge fan of perks that increase carry capacity at all stages of the playthrough. Level 8 Wrestler was a difficult perk to test. The description states it makes clinching easier to win due to your strength, but I spent nearly an hour getting into clinch wars with the local guard, and I didn't notice a huge difference with and without the perk. There seems to be some amount of RNG anytime you clinch with somebody, which is done by walking into or sprinting into an enemy. The first stage of the clinch is determined by who's the strongest, and that person gets to attack, while the defender has a chance to defend against the attack, similar to the way a perfect block works. Without the perk, it feels like the enemy has more of a chance to instantly attack us and force us to block on the first stage. When we turn the perk on, it feels like we have more frames to get our own attack in first and take control of the clinch. While I'm not 100% confident in this, it does seem like the perk gives you a slightly longer window to make the first attack in the clinch. I also tested with other weapons and even unarmed, and it followed the same pattern. Based on these testing results, I feel like this perk is very mediocre since you can still riposte off of a lost clinch and get plenty of damage in, so it's not necessary to win the first stage of a clinch. I do reserve the right to be wrong here, so please let me know in the comments if you're more confident in the answer. Level 10 Tight Grip was also difficult to nail down exactly if and how it works. In theory, it makes knocking people out easier, but in my testing, I didn't notice any difference at all before and after the perk. My Henry is barely level 14 strength, and no matter who I attack from behind, it always looked the same. I even attacked Cumans in the mountains, thinking they would be a tough target, but not a single one of them stopped my attempt. So there's two things going on here. Either the perk is working, but all the enemies I tested against were too weak to notice a difference, or the perk is not working. Either way, it feels like this perk is unnecessary since stealth takedowns are rarely countered until maybe the late game, and by then your strength should be high enough that it doesn't matter anymore anyways. I would personally skip this perk in favor of something else. The other level 10 perk, Train Hard Fight Easy 2, requires that we take Train Hard Fight Easy 1 first. This perk lowers the strength requirement for all weapons by 5 in total. As we can see from the testing, the first perk lowers the strength by 2, and the second level by another 3, so 5 in total. Since we already did most of the damage analysis for having a higher strength, I won't go into as much detail here, but we see our damage for 2 weapons without any perks, then with level 1, and then finally with the level 2 perk. The damage increase is about the same from having no perk to level 1 as it is from level 1 to level 2, so even though the numbers are higher for level 2, the damage doesn't quite scale linearly. Either way, this is an amazing perk and I recommend this one as early as you can get it. Moving on to our first level 12 perk, Strong as a Bull. This perk increases our carry capacity by 20 as we can confirm by the testing, going from 182 max up to 202 with the perk. I also wanted to test if all the other carry capacity perks stacked properly with this one, and I'm happy to say they do. Pack Mule correctly adds another 12, and Hardworking Lad another 8, for a grand total increased carry capacity of 40 with all 3 perks. As I've said before, carry capacity is great to have. I recommend this perk. The next level 12 perk is Vanguard, and decreases the stamina cost of blocking with a shield. As someone who rarely uses shields, it surprised me to find out how they actually work. You only use a shield when doing a normal block, as in holding the block button down and not timing for a perfect block. If you use a perfect block while a shield's equipped, you still use your weapon to move the enemy's weapon aside, which means your shield is useless. Also, shields do not stop an enemy from landing combos, so it's really not recommended, but we can see the stamina drain without the perk is quite substantial, and with the perk, it's much less so. However, I can't really recommend using a shield except as a backup for when a perfect block is missed. For that reason, I have a hard time recommending this perk and shielded combat in general. Level 14 Grand Slam increases the blunt damage caused by all weapons. Most weapons inflict some type of blunt damage, but bladed weapons generally have very low blunt stats, as we can see here. Swapping these out for a mace and an axe, we see a reasonable increase in blunt damage, although the axe is still quite low. Once we take the perk, we see an increase of 1 blunt damage for each sword, but 4 for the mace and 2 for the axe. Damage stats for maces are generally lower than the slash and pierce damage for a comparable sword, but blunt damage negates armor quite well, so my guess is this was done with balancing the game in mind. If you're using a mace, this perk should be mandatory. If you're using axes, then consider it, but it's not necessary, and for all other bladed weapons, I would skip this one. Level 14 Thrasher increases the attack damage when using a fully charged attack. When you hold down the attack button, you'll see your stamina drain and eventually stop. If you release your attack from here, it will count as a fully charged attack. I ran several different scenarios from chopping up cows, sheep, unarmored people, guards, etc., and it was a small but noticeable difference. It's difficult to reproduce the exact strikes to compare, but I've done my best to match the same strike direction and where it landed on the enemy, both with and without the perk. You can see a slight difference in the amount of HP lost between the left and the right side, so it does seem to be working. The good thing about this perk is it works with all melee weapon types. The bad part is you have to use a fully charged attack to get the bonus, which isn't always easy to do. If you've got nothing else to put perk points in, then I guess it's not bad, but I can think of other perks to save for instead. Next, we have the only perk for level 16, Strong Arm. While holding a fully charged attack, we will slowly regain our stamina. Charged attacks are great for feints, and they do more damage, but at the expense of stamina drain. But with this perk, we can see our stamina slowly recover, which is extremely useful, especially when backing up against enemies and waiting for the right opening. One of my favorite tricks is to hold a fully charged attack and use that to master strike since it's faster than switching and then attacking. And with this perk, you can regain all that lost stamina easily while you're waiting. While it may not seem like a great perk at first, with some advanced techniques, this perk can really shine. First up for level 18, we have Heracles, which grants +1 charisma for each 5 levels of strength we have. With this stealth outfit, our Henry has a paltry 7 charisma. But with 30 strength and this perk active, it shoots up to 13 charisma. At first glance, this might seem like a great perk since it boosts charisma quite a lot in the late game, but from my experience, it's not hard to maintain high charisma without it. It's definitely worth taking at some point, but not my first pick. And the final perk for strength, level 18 Grand Slam 2. This perk increases the blunt damage for all weapons by 5%, and since we're required to take Grand Slam 1, the total bonus goes up to 10%. We can see our late game mace has 160 damage with no perks. With Grand Slam 1, that goes up by 8, and with Grand Slam 2 by another 8, or 10% total. This is a great perk for a mace build, but mostly useless for anything else. Now let's take a look at all the data from the testing and put these perks to a ranking system. Starting at level 6 with Hardworking Lad. This perk is very important for a stealth build since you'll be taking people out quietly and moving bodies quite often. I don't find the stamina portion of the perk that important, but the carry capacity is big and it's also useful for any build, not just stealth. The biggest problem this perk has is its neighbor, which is why I'm putting this at A tier. The other level 6 perk, Train Hard, Fight Easy, is one of the best perks in the strength tree since it not only allows us to use any weapon earlier, not just melee weapons, but it continues to benefit us into the late game by boosting the damage output of literally every weapon we use. This should be your number 1 pick for just about every build I can think of, except maybe an unarmed only. This is S tier for sure. Let's look at the level 10 perks, starting with Pack Mule. This is a great perk and it's made even better because of its neighbor, but I'm still struggling to rate it anything higher than A tier. It might even make sense to skip both perks at level 10 altogether and pick up Hardworking Lad, since you only give up a few pounds of carry capacity, but you get a really useful boost to moving bodies around. I'm putting Pack Mule in A tier though, and it should be picked up sooner than later. Moving on to Wrestler, I'm going to start by saying I could be completely wrong about this perk, and maybe I was testing the wrong thing, or there was a flaw in my setup. But after over an hour of trying things out, I couldn't really tell much of a difference with and without the perk. A few frames more to react at best. With that in mind, I'm putting this in D tier, but I'll be happy to change this if somebody can correct me. Moving on to level 10 perks, let's get another bad one out of the way. Tight Grip is supposed to make it easier to stealth kill or knock out someone, but through my testing, I couldn't notice a difference no matter what I tried it on. And this was with a low level character. I'm putting it in D tier, but again, if I come across info that proves I'm wrong, I'll happily change the rankings. Another easy perk to rank. Train Hard, Fight Easy 2 is the second half of one of, if not the best perks in the strength tree. You'll use higher tier weapons sooner than you normally would, and you'll do more damage into the late game. This is an easy S tier for me. Moving on to level 12 perks. Strong as a Bull gives us a straight 20 carry capacity, and compared to its neighbor, it's pure gold. I'm still going to rank it in the A tier because while it's good for any build out there, it's not quite as good as some of the other perks. I'm also moving it in front of Pack Mule since it's nearly double the bonus. On the surface, Vanguard seems like a decent perk. Costing 30% less stamina to block with a shield seems quite good. But considering how bad standard blocking is compared to the many other options for defense like perfect block, perfect dodge, clinching, and so on, I'm having a hard time thinking of a good use case for it, and by extension, this silly perk. I'm putting this in C tier because it obviously works and does use less stamina to block, but you really shouldn't be blocking like this in the first place. Let's look at the level 14 perks, starting with Grand Slam 1. This perk boosts blunt damage by 5% for all weapons. The problem is most weapons have a very low blunt damage stat to start with, so it's only practical for maces, but if you're really stretching it, maybe axes. For a heavy weapons build focus on maces, this is S tier, but for anything else, it really should wait until the late game. Because of how niche it is, I'm putting it in the B tier. Thrasher is an interesting perk in that it's usable with all melee weapons since it boosts fully charged attacks by 5% and all melee weapons can be fully charged. It also pairs nicely with the level 16 perk Strong Arm, so it gets a bump for synergy. While 5% is such a small bonus, I'm still putting it in A tier because of how well it plays with the other perks and all melee weapon types. We've only got one pick for level 16, and boy am I happy it's this one. This perk allows us to regain stamina after an attack is fully charged, and we continue to hold the attack. Not only does this allow us to feint at any time, but it also makes Master Strikes so much faster for sword combat. The fact that we can sit at full stamina with a fully charged attack is insane and probably should be nerfed. This is S tier no matter how you look at it. And finally, the level 18 perks, starting with Grand Slam 2. This is literally a repeat of Grand Slam 1, so I won't spend too much time here. It's great for a mace build and not very useful for anything else, so it gets to snuggle up next to its twin in B tier. And for the final perk, Heracles. This perk gives a bonus of 1 charisma for each 5 strength levels we have for a total of 6 at level 30 strength. Normally, I would recommend this perk highly, but Warhorse nerfed their own perk into the ground with the advent of switching outfits with a click of one button and allowing extremely high charisma overcoats on top of heavy plate armor. There are so many other perks that boost charisma from earlier in the game that by the time we get to this, it's basically not needed anymore. With that said, it's still a decent perk, but I'm putting it in B tier because you really should ignore this until you get everything from S and A tier first. And if you're not using a blunt weapon, get it before Grand Slam. As I always say with these kinds of tier lists, it's very subjective and you should consider your own playstyle before taking advice from anyone else. With that said, I highly recommend taking Train Hard, Fight Easy 1 and 2 as early as possible. Then one of the carry capacity perks, then Thrasher and Strong Arm as soon as you unlock their levels. I would take all carry capacity perks next, and then cry that I have to waste perk points on the rest. I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed with these perks, and I didn't feel that way going into the video, but that's the power of using science and data to look at things objectively. The numbers never lie. Please let me know if I messed up Wrestler or Tight Grip so I can set the record straight. I really do hope I'm wrong on these two. I'm curious which perk surprised you the most. I knew going into this that Strong Arm was decent, but I never made the connection with how amazing it is until running all these tests, so that surprised me the most. I'm working on agility perks next, and if you're interested in checking out the full perks testing and ranking playlist, click this video on screen now. A huge shout out to the Patreon supporters and YouTube members who help make challenging video series like this possible. It takes a tremendous amount of tedious work to pull these off, so I really appreciate your support. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.